about a tool called Q7. To give you a little bit of a context, Q7 is a commercial UI testing tool. So if you want to apply it for a commercial project, you actually have to buy licenses, although it's free for open source. So if you have an open source project, you can get free licenses. And Eclipse, the company I work for, we are not the tool provider, and we didn't invent the tool. The tool is actually provided by a company called Xort. But we are a heavy user of that tool, so we apply it in several projects. So my goal today is give you an experience report from our point of view, so this will be like no advertising talk, but I try to tell you what are our experiences as a user. I would like to start with a short motivation why we actually care about UI testing. This part will be pretty short. Then I would like to demonstrate Q7. My goal would be to give you a first impression how the tool works and how it looks like to create UI tests with Q7. That will be basically a demonstration. And finally, and that will be the longest part, I will talk about our experiences, so like the do's and don'ts, what we do differently if we would do it again. So why do we care about UI testing? Software always works until the first user gets involved. And literally you can write like 100 JUnit tests or 1,000 or 100,000, but at the moment you deploy software at a customer place and the user will do the first click, something will break. So the goal of UI testing for us is not like to replace JUnit tests or something like that. The goal is to create tests which are as close as possible to the thing the user is doing at the end. So we don't want to add more JUnit tests. We want to add a new type of testing, which is actually testing the product in the same way as we would deploy it at a customer. The first consideration, because typically if you don't apply UI testing, you do that in a manual way. So before you ship something, you have some manual tests, maybe alpha tests, beta tests, like a test protocol and something like that. Of course, the first question is it better to do it manual or is it better to automate it? The question for me, from my point of view, really comes down to this. So what's the effort you're spending for both? If we look at the effort for manual tests for every release, you have, let's say it takes 2 days to manually test your product, you will repeat this effort for every new release. And it will be quite linear. So for every release you have precisely the same effort, maybe you add some more test cases, but it continuously grows. While if you automate it, in the beginning you will spend much more effort because you have to create all the test cases and so on. But the expectation should be that over time, you only have to put in a little bit maintenance, so that's like this thing. In the beginning it's more effort, but at some point in time you need a return of investment. That means you save money. You save time and money. And that the reason why I've put out this simple chart is if we can reduce the initial cost for automated testing, it naturally pays off earlier. So that's actually one goal. So what UI testing tools are out there? There are actually more than I have on this slide, but those were the ones I closely looked at. I would put them into 2 groups. In the first group, SWT bot, window tester, and I would put JUnit in the same group. Those are tools I would consider more to be for developer. So they run from the IDE, and if you're a developer, you probably know how to use this tool. But I wouldn't apply those tools for an end user. So if an end user wants to create a test, I think those tools don't work at all. The second group of tools, they are more focused from my point of view on testing like a complete product. And those tools are designed in a way that actually the person who designs the test case doesn't necessarily have to be a developer. And the tools in this group I would consider Jubular. Probably most of you know Jubular. Squish. They have a booth outside, and Q7. So to disappoint you, I will not compare those 3 tools. The truth is, if you want to know which tool is the best for you, you need to try them out. You need to find out which tool is the one which works best for you. I hope I can give you some information today which makes it easier to at least initially answer the question, okay, might Q7 be interesting for me? Okay, so how does Q7 work? The nice thing I like about Q7 is that it has different layers of complexity. The first thing is actually capture and replay. So Q7 is focused on capturing and replaying test cases. And that's what you, like most of the time if you work Q7, that's what you actually do. Once in time you need some setups for test cases. That means for a test case you don't always want to start from scratch, but you need a tooling to create an initial setup. Let's assume initial set of data or something you can test on. And that's what's called setup. Like in JUnit, that will be the before method. That's also something you have to care about quite frequently, but not as often as capture replay, because you can reuse those setups. Then Q7 supports scripting. So when you capture a test case, there will actually be a script, and you can modify that. And sometimes it makes sense to do that, but a lot less than capturing replay. And finally, sometimes you need to do some customization. For example, if a certain control is not supported, or if you need a very complicated setup, well, that's something you typically don't do every day. So like the most effort you will spend in capture replay. So why is Q7, or what is the USP from my point of Q7? The most important thing from my point of view is simplicity. So the tool is very focused on what it does. It doesn't provide like millions of features, but on the other hand, it's still very usable. So you can explain even a non-computer scientist in, let's say, a couple of hours how to work with it, and I will show that. And it's focused on Eclipse RCP. It doesn't do anything else. So it's built for Eclipse RCP and SWT application. So let's demonstrate it. Who has actually used it before? Okay, that's good. Okay, what we see here is the Q7 tool. As you can see, it's an Eclipse application itself, and it looks pretty similar to the Eclipse IDE. And all the logic is pretty similar to Eclipse IDE. The first thing you do if you want to test something is you need to tell Q7 what is the application you want to test. In your iTesting, you call that an application under test, AUT. So down here I have a window showing me all applications I can actually test. The first step is to create one. So I click on this plus button. And now I can actually select a directory where the application is deployed. And this is like the binary, the completely deployed product. I'm not testing source code here. So I browse to my application. For this demonstration, I will actually, you could now choose any kind of RCP application, but to make it simple for you, I will choose an RCP application you all know, which is the Eclipse IDE. Well, you could choose any kind of RCP application, but for this demonstration, I will actually test the Eclipse IDE. So I browse to my Eclipse like this. So I point to the directory where the binary is located. And now actually Q7 inspects this directory. It will look like what applications are there. And now it found this IDE application, so I can basically just click on Finish. And now I can launch this application from within Q7. So let's do that. What's happening now is actually Q7 is creating a new target. It takes the existing application and it adds some Q7 stuff, which allows Q7 to control the application then. So Eclipse is starting up. As we all know, that's very fast. Okay, now I have the IDE running. So now it's switching back to Q7, so now let's create a first test case. Test cases are managed over here. That's the Q7 Explorer, which is pretty much like the Project Explorer. So what I can do is I can create a new Q7 project, call that testing. And within this project, I can now create test cases. So let's create a test case. So now I have to think, what do I want to test? A pretty simple test for the IDE would be to create a project. Let's do that. So I call that create project. Now I see the test case on the right side. It has a name. I can put in description or some text, some tags or something like that, and down here actually the script will be shown. So now to create the test case, I will actually capture it. So what I do is I click on Record over here, and now a second window opens up which is called the control panel. The control panel will actually show me what Q7 records, and behind that I have the real application under test. This is not really good for small screens, so you should have a bigger screen that is able to show both, or two screens. That actually makes sense. Okay, so let's start to create a test case. So I just click, I just use the tool as I would use it without the testing. So for example, I say new Java project, call that test project, click on finish. So what you couldn't see now in the background, Q7 is actually recording all this stuff. And this is the how the script language looks like. So as you can see in the first line, it gets a view, it gets the tree from the view, it gets the menu, and then it clicks on it. So you can actually read, okay, that's what Q7 recorded. And that's actually all you have to know about creating test cases. You just do what you normally would do. So you just use the tool in the way you would normally do it. Now at one point in time, you want to check something, because just like doing it is not enough. You want to control that the tool actually behaves in the way you expect it to. And for this, Q7 provides the assertion mode. So I switch into this assertion mode. I can either click on here or press Alt-Shift-7. So let's do that. And let's go back to the application. And now Q7 in the assertion mode allows me to select a UI element which I want to assert something on. And you might, hopefully you can see there is this red border. So now I can select, okay, what do I want to check? So for example, I could check that now after I created a project, the project is actually visible over here. So let's do that. So I click on here. And now Q7 shows me the attributes of this UI elements, which are actually the public properties of the SWT element. So as you can see, for example, it shows me that the caption is test project, it shows me it's not selected, and so on. And if I want to check one of those properties now, I can just create a check mark here, and then I tell Q7, okay, please check that the caption is equals to test project. And then I click on add, and as you can see, it's added to the script now. So I can continue with that. So let's, maybe as another example, let's not only check that there's this node, I also want to check that there's only one node. So this time I select not the item, but the tree. And the tree, for example, has a property called item count, which is the number of items displayed in the tree. So let's check this too. And now I have actually two checks over here. Okay, and that's the way how you record. Of course, if you have real test cases, that gets more complicated, but that's the basic nature. So let's stop with that. So I click on stop here, and I save it, and let's replay it once. So now we come to the first problem. If I would now replay this test case, it would actually fail because there's already a project there, so the behavior will be different. So for now, I will manually delete the project. I will show you in a second how you can solve this kind of problems. So let's delete this. And now I can actually run my test case. And as you can see, it's doing what I just did, as simple as that. Okay, so let's go back to the Q7 IDE. So I close this window. There are a couple more things I would like to show you. Of course, there's much more, but like the most important thing, the first thing you start with after recording test cases is this context string. And that actually means most of the test cases expect some setup. This simple test case expects that there's no existing project. But if you create more complex test cases, for example, you might want to have an existing project with data where you can create a test on. And for this, you can define context in Q7. So I do that. I create a new context, and I call that context empty workspace, because my expectation is that empty workspace. My expectation is that the workspace is empty. As you can see down here, there are several different types of context. So for example, you can put something into the workspace, you can copy folders, you can apply some preferences and so on. And finally, you can also record context. That means if you need to click in your tool to set up a certain state, you can actually also record that and use that as a setup for your test cases. So for now, I will use a workspace context. So now I have two possibilities. Over here, it offers me the possibility to clear the workspace. That's what I actually want. What I could also do is I could capture the workspace, and then Q7 will capture the current workspace in the running tool and apply it as a context. But I don't want that. I want an empty context for this test case. And now I go back to the test case and add this context to the test case. You could add several contexts. And now, currently the tool, in the workspace, I have a project, so the test case would fail. But with the context, you can actually see first the project is deleted, and then the project is added again, and it works. So I'm almost done with the demo. Two more things I would like to show. First, if you want to change something on the test case, you can either re-record. Another nice thing is that Q7 actually allows you to complete a test case later on. So for example, if I would like to add a step to this test case now, I could basically click on record, and then Q7 will play the test case until the end, and now I can actually add a new step. So let's assume I want to delete this project again. Then I can just do it like that, and then I click on stop again, and Q7 adds that to the existing test case. Another thing you can do, you can actually modify the script down here just by typing something in. And what I will do now is I will change the name of my test project to test project 1 to actually show you what happens if the test case fails, because now the test case will fail. So let's do that. And as you can see here on the left side, that's pretty much like JUnit. So it shows you that, for example, in this case, this item couldn't be found. Finally, last thing I would like to show is that for more advanced users, it's actually possible to write test cases with scripting too. So you don't have to capture. What we usually use is a mixture. So we capture most of the stuff, but sometimes we add some commands. So for one example for a command is you can repeat steps. So let's assume I would like to run this steps like 100 times. I could actually say repeat, and then times, let's do it 100 times, and that's the command, like this. And these are all the steps I would like to repeat, and then I can click on here, and we'll just repeat this like 100 times. That's actually the most cool thing about UI testing in general. You can just do something, and then the computer is doing the work for you, and you can just watch it. Okay, so let's stop this. And let's go back to the presentation. Sorry. Okay, so in the remaining time of my talk, I actually will tell you some of our experiences, how this works in practice. So the first step is how to get started. Most important thing, before you apply something like Q7, do an evaluation, compare it to Jubalar and Squish, and to find out, does the tool work well with your application? Can you test most of your UI? And are the testers able to work with the tool? So I would spend some time into that to not do a wrong decision here. The good thing about Q7 from my point of view is you can get started very easily. So it's not initially, you don't need a large setup. So you can basically just try it. And don't try to like automate everything from day one. If you automate it like 20% of your test cases and you do 80% manually, that's still better than doing everything manually. And even at the end, if you still have some manual tests, that's fine. So start slowly and growly and make some experiences with the tool. About the effort, because that's a really important consideration. So about what is the effort of creating your UI test? The answer is, of course, it depends on the test case. but I really must say from our experience, there are projects where the setup is okay, and then we can actually create test cases in the same order of magnitude as we would, as it would take for a manual test. I would say like 3-4 times longer than a manual test, which is pretty good, because then it pays off like after maximum 3 or 4 releases. The good thing is you can repeat it every day, so you have early feedback. That's another huge advantage. Interesting question is who should create the test cases. So do you need a testing team? Should the developer do it? The end user? For us, it worked well to let end users, like technical end users, create the test cases. They need some training, obviously. But what doesn't work is like giving the tool to an end user and let him create like 100,000 test cases without looking at that. Because there are some things where you need the help of developers, or let's say like computer people, especially for the setup. So a model which worked good for us is like letting non-computer persons create the test cases. They have to have good knowledge about the tool, but have like something like a daily meeting with developers where you review the test cases. So, and what you try to get from these daily meetings is, are there any possibilities to improve the setup? Is there something wrong with the test cases? Can we improve over there? Can we simplify things for the testers? So that's the model I would prefer. However, what I also wouldn't do, we actually, in one project, we had this mistake. Don't like isolate the testing team, because that will actually create effort. If a developer changes something which affects the test cases, the developer should actually be able to adapt the test case too. And that should actually be the person who adapts it. So don't isolate your eye testing in another team. Everybody in the project should be able to run the tool and modify the test cases. Length of the test cases, initially we had longer test cases because actually that's quite natural. If you start to record a test case, you just continue. And you create long test cases. That's convenient to create them, but it's hard to maintain them. Because if you need to change something, or if something is changed, or if you try to identify an error, if the test case is very long, that's difficult. It's exactly the same for JUnit, but the danger is there because you just naturally continue to do something with the tool. And that's something you have to teach the people who create the test cases. So always saying, okay, please split that in like 3 test cases and so on, and use context heavily. Like create setups that you can only test like small steps, and all the setup is done for you. Isolation is like the most important thing, because in all projects where we applied that, people to start to build test cases upon each other. That means like first we create a project, then we add some data, then we do something with the data and so on. But this actually creates an order in the test cases, and it's not, this order is literally not supported. There's no explicit order. It should be possible to run any test cases on its own. Sounds natural, but people always did that because it's kind of, it feels naturally. And if you're not a computer scientist, I think you're not used to this like modular only thing, standalone test case. So that's really important to review that the test cases are isolated from each other. Otherwise, you are not able to maintain that. Even if you care about this, it's not always easy to achieve that, because one test case might change a certain thing in your tool, and another test case, which is like 100 steps after that, might fail only because of that. So isolation is really important. So if it's possible to just reset your tool to a clean state, that's really important, and that's some effort to achieve on the tool side. Investments into setup. It makes sense. So capturing and replaying is pretty simple. The thing where you actually spend the effort is the setup, so to create the initial state of the tool. And if you invest something there, it's much faster to record the test cases. So, for example, if your tool works with a database, it will actually be some effort to create functionality to reset the database to a certain state. But if you don't do that, you will not get isolated test cases. So try to have a good setup, and also try to programmatically help the UI testers. One example for that, we were testing a client-server application, and the application actually was, if you had two clients, and you do something on one client, actually it should appear on the other client, and the UI should update and so on. So it would be quite tedious for a tester to change something and then always manually check on the other side whether the data is exactly the same. So what we actually did is we created like a programmatic feature which compared the states on both sides like programmatically, because we could literally like just compare the two data, and then we added a feature for the user so they can just press a key combination to check whether both things are the same, and then a dialog pops up, and okay, that was fine. So that makes it like much easier to create a lot of test cases for the client server. So look for these things to help the developers creating test cases faster and reduce the number of necessary steps. Extensibility, it's possible to extend Q7. You can add own commands to the language, and you can also extend Q7 to understand your own controls. Documentation is not good. Luckily, we were very much in contact with the developers, so they helped us with everything, so we got good support, but documentation on the website could be improved, like for the basic extensibility things. Another danger, I would say, is if you have this set up this tool and it works quite nicely, you actually start to produce a lot of test cases. But the danger is that you actually replace the JUnit test and you create more Q7 tests, less JUnit tests, even for the UI. That's not a good idea. I would still write JUnit tests for UI components and only test like the complete system with Q7. That means, as an example, if you have a control in your tool, and the control shows some validation based on certain data, create a JUnit test to test this functionality with a lot of data, because you can have loops, you can have like data sets and so on. It runs very fast and it isolates or it in particular tests this functionality. And afterwards create one Q7 test which tests this validation. That's something which work better for us. And it reduces actually the number of Q7 tests, so don't replace JUnit. Another thing is, for most of the stuff in UI, you don't even have to use SWT-bot. It's surprising how much things you can test with JUnit, because as an example, a control, you can programmatically create a shell, you can access all the data of the control, so there's a lot of stuff you can still test with JUnit. For the infrastructure, Q7, there are actually two important parts of the infrastructure. Q7 provides a Maven plugin, so you can just make it part of the build. And about the test cases themselves, the test cases are actually text files, so you can manage them with any existing versioning system. So we have put them into SVN or JIT, and that works quite nicely. However, actually the difficult thing was to teach non-computer people how to use Git. But, however. One problem is definitely that text execution takes time. So if you create a lot of test cases, it takes much time, so up to several hours. And there are some solutions to that problem. First, you can watch out in your test cases, so reduce the time, for example, contexts take. If a context takes like 1 minute, and it is the context of every test cases, that will add 1 minute by the number of test cases. So you should be careful in the contexts. Second thing you can reduce time is by a larger server, more memory. What we actually did in all of our projects is we run Q7 in a second build, which is actually triggered by the normal build, because then people don't have to wait until all the Q7 tests completed. However, the danger with that is that this build is not like taken care of, that people just ignore it, that something fails there. So you have to deal with that. And it's also, especially that might be interesting for the open source project, there is a cloud service provided by Q7 and it's for free for open source project. So for our open source project, we actually use the cloud of Q7 to run our test cases on. So we don't slow down the Eclipse build infrastructure. Maintenance of the test case. The question is, so tools like Squish and Jubilar, they have an abstraction layer or like a layer between the test cases and the UI. So they map a certain thing you use in the test cases to a certain thing in the UI, and if the UI changes, you can actually only adapt the mapping, and all test cases using this component will still work. Q7 doesn't have that. So for example, if you change the title of a window, a test case will fail. What does it mean for the maintenance? I would say that really depends on your tool and on the way you create test cases. I would say if you create like a huge number of test cases for the same UI, like you want to run the same thing with a huge set of data again and again and again, it's really tedious to like adapt 100 test cases if only one text field changes. But if you have like broader test cases, maintenance is quite okay. The way you do it is either you look at the script. As an example, if the title of a window changes, you go to the script and you can literally just search and replace for the string, and then you will actually adapt your test case. The other thing which you can do, if you have a good setup and it's easy to create a new test case, if a test case fails, just re-record it. So that's like the motto of Q7. It's not like maintaining everything, you can simply also record it. But yeah, of course, there's maintenance cost. And there are some test cases which really drive you crazy because they always fail and you don't find the reason for like over a month. So there is this thing. Okay, and that's actually it. Because I was missing some documentation in the beginning, I actually created a tutorial, like a basic tutorial showing you the first steps. You can find it here. If you have any questions, you want to learn more about our experiences, just talk to me after the talk. Grab me, and thank you for your attention. Are there any questions right now? Yeah. Honestly, I don't know, because we only tested it with one language, but there's a person sitting behind you who can probably answer that question. I would also say, like, testing the internationalization is quite some effort, because you actually have to check any string. So I would also rather do that not with Q7, but with JUnit, or making sure that the mechanism works. Yeah. Are there more questions? Cross-platform? Yeah, that's possible. So you can configure the build that it runs on several operating systems, and we actually do that. Yeah. No. How does it work? Yeah, quite recently something like procedures were introduced, so you can actually find steps and like call them from the test case. In practice, I must say we mostly use context. So like the initial setup, we don't really use a lot of scripting. We mostly use capture replay, but it's possible to define like procedures which you can just call then, like common steps. Yeah, I wouldn't say, yeah, that's not supported well, I would say. Quite recently there was one feature introduced which is a super context, and you can actually add like a number of contexts to a test case and it will repeat the test case with different contexts. But if you, let's say you want to test a calculator with like 100,000 different combinations, I wouldn't do that with Q7. I think that's not the best use case for it. Mm. There was a last question? Yeah. It does that on the build server, yes. Yeah. I almost never look at it, but so the typical procedure, if a test case fails, I just run it locally and I see where it fails, and then it supports debugging, so you can actually see, okay, that's happening. So it's pretty reproducible. Okay, time is over. Thank you for your attention.